Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our next Child Life in Action. I'm Megan Roloff, Director of Member Engagement and Partnerships for ACLP. As you know, in this series, we are having conversations with child life specialists that are doing great, unique, and innovative work with a particular focus on everything that's happening right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, but also things that we can take with us once we get past this crisis. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by some of the leaders of our ACLP benchmarking committee, the group that has been behind the creation and development of the Child Life Professional Data Center. So to get started, I'm going to turn it over to each of you to introduce yourself. Rene, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I'm Rene Gilbo. I am the Director of Patient Experience, Child Life, and Creative Therapies in New Orleans at Children's Hospital. And I am the current chair who will actually be outgoing of the benchmarking committee, and I'm very excited to be here today.
Yes, I'll go next. Alyssa Alexa. I'm Director of Child Life and Expressive Therapies at Children's Memorial Hermann in Houston. And I am the incoming chair for CLPDC.
And I am Diane Collin. I'm the manager of Child Life at Texas Children's Hospital, also in Houston, and I'm the incoming co-chair.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all of you for making the time to do this today. Just to kind of level set for anyone watching that maybe isn't as familiar with the CLPDC, can you give us kind of the Cliff Notes summary of what it is, why it's important, and why it's really for all child life specialists?
Sure, I'll start. Data is so important. It is, as we know, it's not always necessarily in our wheelhouse, but it is how we tell our story. And we have to be able to communicate with our leaders, our administrators, and what they know is numbers and data. And so we have to be able to speak the same language. And why this is so important for people on every level, no matter how small, how large, whether it's a single person program, only member of Child Life, or whether it's large departments, it will be how you collect information and how you tell your story about what it is that you do. So it is very individualized, it's very unique. It's not just about comparing to other programs, but it's internally so important for you so that you can communicate what you do every day to the leaders and administrators in your hospital.
Just a little piece to add to that, I think it also shows us trends in the 5 different buckets that we collect data in. And it's starting to really give us some ideas of how child life specialists function in those areas. So we're able to really understand trends in an ICU setting versus an ED versus an outpatient. So that's another big component of why we collect this data.
I think also in the data center, it also is a benchmarking tool. So you can look at like hospitals, you can look at hospitals throughout the country. How many have art therapy programs? How many have expressive arts? And so you can use that data to be able to compare and contrast your own hospital.
Thank you for that kind of Cliff Notes version, just so we're all on the same page as we keep going with this conversation. One of the misconceptions that's been floating out there around the CLPDC, and just so everyone knows, we've had this now for 4 years, I want to say. 3 years, 4 years? I don't know. I feel like we've been talking about this for forever, and some of you for much longer than I've been involved with it. But one of those misconceptions that has been pretty persistent is that seeing more patients is always better. And so that it might hurt your child life program if you're putting in accurate numbers that are lower than another program. How would you address that misconception?
So I think it goes back to how we tell our story. And I think it's been very challenging for child life specialists because we are taught to advocate on behalf of our patients and families, but also about ourselves and what we do every day. And I think it's very hard not to feel like you have to include every little detail about every little thing that you do every day. And what does that look like Alyssa was saying earlier? You know, how do we paint that picture? How do we make people understand what it is that we do? And so sometimes looking at just numbers if they see a small number, it makes people very anxious and very uncomfortable that, oh my gosh, then I'm not doing my work if I only saw 4 patients, not understanding the data collection behind it and how we collect and what that encompasses as a big picture. And so sometimes if you're just looking at the number, yes, it looks good if there's the number 20 versus the number 5, but it's, again, not telling the whole story. And so it is very important, regardless of what that number is, it is unique and individualized to what that child life specialist is doing and what it encompasses and what it entails.
I think a part of this also has acuity to it. And and every hospital has a different size. And so if I am moving through a hospital floor that has only 10 beds, it's much different than a hospital unit that has 40. And just the travel time alone, the acuity that is happening within a hospital setting also plays into the numbers. And so that's why that story is so important, because it tells your hospital's individual story through that process.
I was just thinking when y'all were talking that I think we've been through this ups and downs of that, if you have high numbers versus low numbers. But what it really boils down to is the characteristics, again, of those specific buckets or those units, right? And so we know the in-depth work that happens, and it's allowing us to give administration a more realistic picture, like in an ICU setting, for instance. A child life specialist may see on average 3 to 6 patients in an 8-hour shift because of the in-depth work they're doing, but that's the added information that we can provide. But when you look, like Diane was saying, you can compare to other hospitals, the trends are the same in all ICUs around the country. And so it's showing that a child life specialist that functions in that area is only have the bandwidth, basically, to see 4 to 5 patients, because the interactions could be an hour to hour and a half per patient. So I think there is a lot of misconceptions because we're not collecting that, how much time is spent with each MRN, but each department does that on their own. But the trends are still very similar across the nation. So that would be
and
my
I think what's excited about having the CLPDC is that we have access to those hospitals. So like Diane said, when you look at it and you're comparing other hospitals, if you see something that is interesting to you or concerning to you, you can reach out and call that person and say, hey, I'm wondering why your numbers are this, or why are your numbers that? And again, being able to give more information and tell that story is beneficial. So being a member of the CLPDC gives you access to others that you can reach out to and can contact, instead of doing, say, a blind listserv email and saying, hey, who's doing XYZ? You have that wonderful information right there, all in one place that you can access, which is also extremely helpful.
So I think what you've all kind of hit on, and I want to emphasize again, just for anyone that's maybe been exploring the idea of starting with the CLPDC, but feels intimidated or maybe concerned about, if I put these numbers in and it shows that I'm low on the charts compared to other hospitals. The CLPDC is not measuring quality. It's not measuring the really kind of unique things about how different child life programs are structured in different hospitals. So, yes, it will give you a beautiful, beautiful charts and graphs. And, I've turned into a data nerd. I love that stuff. And I think all 3 of you on this call would agree with that. But that's only one portion of the picture. And without the storytelling, without that additional context that you, as the child life specialist or child life manager, whatever your role is within that hospital, you kind of color in the picture and fill out all those pieces that, at the end of the day, the turning graph is just one data point. And there's a whole lot of other things that we can't capture it all in one chart and graph. So that storytelling piece is just so important.
Absolutely. The CLPDC is a tool, just like we have so many other resources that we utilize to help tell our story, to help people understand what it is that we do on a daily basis. This is just one piece of that valuable tool that we can use to help people understand and support what it is that we're doing. Because part of, again, like I said, administrators, what they know are numbers. And so we have to be able to provide that piece of that information to them. And the CLPDC can do that for us. And so I think that's the biggest part of even somebody starting off small or starting off, it's a start. That's okay to start small. You have the people to help and support you, but it's just a very important piece that we're going to need moving forward, especially as we continue to grow our profession.
And an important piece is it's a data-driven story. It's not just a story, it's driven by the data that we have collected throughout the nation and within our hospital setting.
So switching gears a little bit, I want to bring this conversation more to what's going on in our world today with the COVID-19 pandemic. A few weeks back, we had a number of programs reach out wanting to know what they should do with their quarterly data, tracking the patients that they're seeing during the pandemic. Some of these programs were worried because they're just seeing fewer patients than usual because there are fewer patients. And, and there are fewer patients for all kinds of reasons. Maybe there's reduced staffing, they're having lower patient volumes, both. And they're worried about putting in data that isn't representative of, what they usually do, how they usually function. So I'm curious what you would each say to a program that's kind of worried about their pandemic data being off from what they normally would report.
Well, I think what's exciting about data is that it ebbs and flows. I mean, you learn as you go, it's fluid. And I think what Alyssa was speaking to a little bit earlier about trends is we don't have any trend data really based on crisis at this level. Like, this is a national crisis. This isn't just one hospital going through maybe a hurricane season or something like that. This is something on a national level that everybody is experiencing. And so, of course, like you said, being a data nerd now, we want to see what that shows, because we know, again, internally, that we have an impact, that we can help children and families through crisis, and it may be in different ways. But now, how are we collecting that data? How are we tracking that? What is it that we're doing so that we, again, have information that is data-based? And so I'm anxious and excited and hope that people will continue to put in that data and not be so hesitant or fearful that it's going to skew anything, but that it's going to help us predict future outcomes.
And the interesting thing to that, I just had this conversation this morning, is what is going to be our new normal, right? Like, it's unclear to any of us if we're going to go back to what February, which is the last month that was somewhat normal for anybody. And so it could be our new normal numbers. We don't know that. And so if we're not putting it in fear that we're going to give wrong numbers or misguiding numbers, I think that also would be a misconception, because we have no idea what the future will hold or how long this pandemic is going to go. And so it's better to get something in so that we can have some data collection over this time in uncertain times. And it could end up being our new normal. So put it in, let's see what happens. And that's why we've got the analysis happening on the other end with the people that run that data center that can run the numbers for us. So,
and people are doing the work. We know people are working. It may be working differently. So we still want to be able to capture that information and that data, because we know it's happening. And we don't want it to be that, okay, then nobody was working during this time or pandemic. I think it's still important to document what it is that's being done, even though it is different.
And I think every hospital is giving a different vision of what child life specialist workflows look like in a pandemic. And I think collectively as a profession, understanding that data. So we all have different infection control standards of what our workloads look like, and being able to capture that information, and as an organization and as a profession coming together and say, here's our value during this time. This is where we were able to shine. These are the things that we were able to implement and see during this pandemic.
Well, and we've been hearing a lot too about child life programs doing all kinds of activities to help support their hospitals, staff support, going into labor pool to help fill other needs. And yeah, on days like that, you might not actually have a patient encounter to report, but you're still working. And that's that's important to track. And again, where that storytelling piece comes in of, maybe for that, 3-month quarter period, the patient encounters are really low, but then tell the story, what was happening, because there's incredible work being done by child life specialists, even if it's not directly related to patients the way we normally would think of it.
Mm-hmm.
So on the flip side of this conversation, what about programs that are just stretched too thin right now? That the idea of one more thing, this might be the one thing too many. What advice would you have for them?
I think you got to start somewhere. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
You're like, I think it's hard, anything that's new or changed or different, but once you start doing it, like anything, it becomes a habit. It becomes, for my staff, they never even thought not to continue collecting data at this time, even though things have changed, because it's their normal. It's what they do. So even if you take one piece of it and start off small, if it's just entering your annual program data that you have and what you have easily accessible, just to start somewhere. If it's choosing just one bucket, even if you service all 6 buckets, if it's just starting in one area just to get started and start to get into that routine of doing it, once you do it, it just becomes second nature.
Yeah. I was just going to say the other flip side of that is it also shows, even just still collecting those MRNs and how much time you spend, even more so in pandemic and crisis, when they're trying to figure out if we are essential and if we need to be in the hospital. This has allowed me for my team, to still collecting those numbers, is saying, show how many interactions you're having. We're actually taking away meetings now. We're taking away other things so we can be more at bedside to help kids and families understand this. And so I think when you actually are inputting it, maybe that's the fear, is how do you compile all the numbers? And some of the programs right now, we have people that are doing work from home, stuff like that. These are great projects to give the work from home individuals within your team to collect and then either input themselves or give to you to just have 6 numbers to plug into a database.
I think also too, give yourself grace. This is a lot of stuff. We have lots of things hitting us on a day-to-day basis, and give yourself grace. I was on this committee for 1.5 years, and finally I was like, oh, I finally get it. So it does take time. It's not something that you can just always jump into. And there is a community of leaders around this nation that are here to help you and talk through that and sit with you, because we were once there too. And it's really exciting once you can learn it and understand it. And the value to it is huge.
Well, and to echo,
don't be fearful of the numbers. Like if you're worried that the numbers are going to not be accurate or perfect, that's where you learn, because the numbers I entered the first time were way off base from everyone else's. And I was like, oh, I didn't calculate that right. And so you can go back the next quarter and figure that out. So don't be scared of the numbers that you collect. Put them in and see where they fall and see how, what it shows you and what maybe to tweak or do different.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly, because this was not in my wheelhouse. This was not what is comfortable for me. Just like kind of Diane said, don't worry so much about it and give yourself that chance. Do what you can do and try it, and don't be afraid to fail, or don't think that if you're not succeeding right out the box that you're failing at it, because it takes time to learn this process. Because I don't think anybody that's doing data now ever thought this is where we'd be. I certainly did not ever think this is where I would be. But just don't be afraid to try, and it's okay. We've all taken lots of stumbles and learned and had to use each other for support and resource, which I think is what we do naturally in the child life community. And this isn't any different. There are people out there that will certainly help talk you through.
And just to echo Diane's comment, about giving yourself some grace, if this is the one thing too much right now, don't burn yourself out. The data will still be there. we said this in one of the ACLP messages we put out about this topic, but if for whatever reason, if this is the one thing too much right now and you have to stop collecting data for the time being, that does not invalidate, all the data you may have previously entered, and it doesn't make future data less valuable. Likewise, if this is something that's been on your to-do list and a pandemic happened and now suddenly it's way lower on the to-do list, that's okay. That's still, your future data is still valuable, and we're here to help when you're ready. So let's switch gears again for a minute, and just on a more personal note, Rene, you started kind of alluding to this, but how did you all become interested in data for child life? Because it's not something that comes naturally to a lot of us. I think we've all kind of picked it up and become comfortable and become confident talking about it, mainly just being involved with the committee for so long, but it's not a natural starting place for a lot of child life specialists. So it'd be great if you could kind of share your stories of how this came to be a passion project.
So for me, it was, this all started, it's been about a 10-year journey. We were having a conversation at the director's retreat and conference, and it was soon after Katrina for me. I'm in New Orleans, and I had lost a lot of my staff and was kind of rebuilding, and I thought this was going to be really easy, that we'd start collecting data, we'd share numbers, and I would get more staff just because other programs were in a much better place than I was. And that's how I would validate getting more positions, by comparing myself to other programs. And my administration would be like, sure. And I would be able to hire more people. And then soon after that journey started, I was definitely on a learning curve of how we did this from, we built this completely out of volunteers, having to learn on ourselves, Excel spreadsheets and pivot tables. And, we had 45 programs step up and said, we'll do a pilot program. And we were ultimately looking for this magic ratio that would all tell us that, for every 10 kids, we could have one child life specialist. But as we learned over the years, that it was a lot more than that. But it just became, as I learned more and more how important this is, and having the conversation with leaders and administrators, and how hospitals, they are a business. And at the end of the day, we had to figure out how to speak the language, how to tell our story, how to have a seat at the table, and be knowledgeable about sharing this information. And so it just became more and more determined of, we're going to make this work, and we're doing it, and it's exciting. And we still have a ways on this journey to go, but it's amazing to think where we kind of started from a simple conversation of, yes, we need to be able to compare with other programs and what we're doing, into where we're at now.
I'm very similar to Rene. I'll echo everything you said. I think my big frustration over the 24 years that I've been in the profession is, we tell these stories and they tear at heartstrings, they do. But at the bottom line is that the finance team wants to know how it's going to hit the bottom line, right? Like how the financial numbers will play. And so I think that's where the data came in to me, is like, how could we speak their language? What can we do? And then I got introduced to this committee and realized that this is exactly what they're talking about. And so it's translating that to my team, even in simple things that we used to track time in 15, or like increments of like 15 minutes an hour. And now we talk units, like 1 unit equals 15 minutes, because that's the nursing language. And so we need to speak more like languages. And so in a nutshell, that's what they want. They don't really want the stories. They want to know how it'll affect the bottom line. And so that's what data does for me.
I am a little bit different in that I have a co-manager who was really data driven and was on this committee, and I kind of passed the buck to her, and I was not involved in it at all. I was the one who created the programs. I wanted to be the fun person. And when she left her role, it left a gap in our department, and I did not want that gap, because what I found in that time period is that data-driven story told a lot of information. And I was able to really support my team having that data. I was able to speak to what our needs were as I had that data. And so it was a tool that I learned through watching her and seeing the value in which she could bring and the information we were able to gather. And I didn't want it lost in that process. So I jumped in, feet forward, fumbled quite a lot, but I'm learning that process. And I really have become to love the numbers in that, and I love the data and how that can tell a story and make impact. And I oftentimes don't find the impact that I want, but it doesn't mean we're not continuing to try and get there.
So what should child life specialists who are interested in data in general, or the CLPDC specifically, do if they want to kind of get started down this path?
I think if you have an interest, don't be afraid to join, volunteer for the benchmarking committee or reach out to somebody on the committee. I think if you have an interest, don't shy away from it, and don't be like, oh, I can't do that because that's not in my wheelhouse. That is, we want people to embrace this and learn. And there's so many people out there that we think are interested. And I think I got to see Scott Hamilton. I'm really dating myself now because all of my staff, after I saw him speak, I was so excited, came back to my office and they were like, who's that? And it broke my heart. But one of the things that I got out of his talk was that we have to learn to love the things that we're afraid of. And we have to learn to love the parts of our job that are most scary to us and that we shy away from. Because when we do that, we're better for it. And I believe that about the data. I think it's something that so many people are afraid of, or they're just like, I can't do that. But when they start to, just like Diane said, once you start to dig into it and realize how it can help you and make you better and give you more confidence and be able to do what is best for our peers and our departments, then we're all better for it. And I think it's just a wonderful growth possibility. And it opens so many doors, I think, for all of us that have gotten involved in this. So I would say just go for it. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. Try it.
I think also starting small. We've had child life specialists around the country and says, my leader's not into this. My leader doesn't want it. Well, help, start small, smart with just yourself or a few members of your team, be able to capture the data, talk through that and show the value to it, bring that to their attention. We're all here to help you through that process and see what can come from that success of just starting small.
And knowing that ACLP is there to help, I think is so right, Diane. Like you just said, if your leader's not ready for it, but you have an interest, then we're here to support you. This committee, this group in the ACLP is here to be able to support that individual and can help.
Yeah, I was going to say, be the fire starter for your team, right? Because if you don't have to be a leader to be the one that brings this and dissects it and figures it out for your team. So be the fire starter within your team and see where it can take your team.
Well, and just to emphasize again, all four of us are child life specialists. Unless someone's been keeping a secret from me, nobody's got a statistics background or data analysis background. It's a learnable skill. It absolutely is a learnable skill. And, we want to help you learn that skill. So with that, I just want to thank Rene, Alyssa, and Diane for taking the time to have this conversation. And I hope for all of you watching that it provides some peace of mind around data and maybe some inspiration to get started with collecting some of your data, or if you already are, maybe dive a little bit deeper into it. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. The best way to do that is to email datacenter@childlife.org, and we will be happy to help you with whatever you need. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you for the next Child Life in Action.
Thank you.
Thank you.